Okay, so let's have operating segment, chapter 13 sa inyong book. Or di ko pala sure kung anong chapter sa book na meron kayo. So the objectives of this chapter is to know the core principle of segment reporting, to understand the concept of an operating segment, to identify the criteria for the recognition of a reportable segment, and to identify the information required to be disclosed for a reportable segment. So, PFRS 8 sets out the requirements for disclosure of information about operating segment. So, PFRS 8 po yung sinusunod natin dito sa operating segment or accounting for operating segment. So, ano daw ba yung core principle netong segment reporting? So, the core principle of segment reporting is an entity shall disclose information to enable users of financial statements to evaluate the nature and financial effects of the business activities in which it engages and the economic environments in which it operates. So, ibig sabihin, segment reporting is the disclosure of certain financial information about what? About the products and services ng entity na kanyang pinuproduce or kinikater, and the geographical areas in which an entity operates, kung saan ba nag-ooperate si entity. So the purpose of such disclosure is to enable investors and users make better assessment of each business activity, leading to the understanding of the performance of the entity as a whole. Okay, so para magkaroon tayo ng better assessment or understanding kung ano ba talaga ang performance or kamusta naman kaya ang operation ni company. So what is an operating segment? Okay, so para masabi nating operating segment ang isang component ng entity, dapat engages in business activities from which it may earn revenue and incur expenses, including revenue and expenses relating to transactions with other components of the same entity. So, ibig sabihin, operating segment can generally be thought of as distinguishable component ng entity na engage sa business activities na nag-generate din ng revenues and expenses. So, whose operating results are regularly reviewed by the entity's chief operating decision maker to make decisions about resources to be allocated to the segment and assess its performance. So, chief operating decision maker yung tawag natin sa nag-identify ng function ng entity. Okay? So, siya rin yung nagde-decide or responsible for the allocation of resources and assessing the performance of operating segment. And letter C, and for which discrete financial information is available. So, sabi ang operating segment ay nag-engage sa business activities for which it has yet to earn revenue. So, example, yung mga startup operations may be operating segments before earning revenue. Okay? Pero, not every part of an entity is necessarily an operating segment or part daw ng operating segment. Anong example nun? Yung corporate Bisaya ba? Headquarters or some functional departments na pwedeng hindi nag-earn ng revenue, okay? Or pwedeng nag-earn din ng revenue that is incidental only to the activities of the entity would not be operating segments. So, kung yung department na yon is nag-earn or sometimes hindi nag-earn, hindi mo siya masasabi na part ng operating segment. Kasi parang hindi naman talaga regularly, okay, na nag-earn siya ng revenue or ng expenses. Identifying operating segment. So, paano natin masasabi kung operating segment ba yung component ng entity? Okay, so meron tayong ginagamit na approach. So, ano tong approach na to? So, management approach yung ginagamit natin to identify an operating segment. So, the operating segments are identified based on the components of the entity that are considered to be important for internal management reporting purposes. Kaya nga sabi ay management approach kasi for internal management reporting purposes. So, in other words, So, a component that sells primarily or exclusively to other operating segments ay included din sa definition ng ating operating segment kung ganun siya minamanage. So, the idea is that the reporting of segment information is seen through the eyes of management and users would wish to see the business as the chief operating decision maker. So, yung risk and reward approach ay hindi na natin sinama dito. So, it is abandoned by the IFRS. Segment. So, paano natin masasabi na reportable segment to? So, meron tayong sinusunod. So, kailangan ma-meet any of the following quantitative thresholds. Okay? So, ano yung mga threshold na dapat ma-meet? So, kahit isa lang daw doon yung ma-meet niya, ay masasabi na nating reportable segment siya. So, number 1, the segment revenue including both sales to external customers and inter-segment sales or transfers. Pag sinabing inter-segment sales or transfers, doon lang mismo yun sa loob ng company nangyari yung sales. Okay, is 10% or more of the combined revenue, internal and external of all operating segments. So, ang kailangan mo is 10% ng total segment revenue na included yung external at inter-segment sales. Then second, the absolute amount of profit or loss of the segment is 10% or more of the greater in absolute amount of, number 1, combined profit of all operating segments that reported a profit and combined loss of all operating segments na nakapag-report ng loss. So, anong ibig sabihin nitong number 2? So, 10% pa rin. Dapat, yung makukuhang profit or loss ng segment ay 10% daw ng absolute amount ng profit or loss na mas mataas. Okay? So, for example, meron kang segment A to D. Then, may nakuha ka dong loss or profit sa lahat ng segments na yon. So, ang gagawin mo is i-combine mo lahat ng profits, then i-combine mo lahat ng losses na meron, then i-compare mo kung saan yung mas mataas doon sa profit or loss. For example, ang profit mo is 1.5 million, then ang loss na nakuha mo is 1.1 million. Sino mas mataas? Siyempre, yung 1.5 million. I-ignore mo na yung positive or negative, meaning ignore mo na kung profit or loss siya kasi nga absolute amount yung titignan mo. Okay, so 10% nung greater amount which is 1.5 million ay 1.5 million times 10% is 150,000. So, dapat yung segments A to D mo is 150,000 or more para masabi mo siyang reportable segment. So, same din, ganun kay segment revenue. Dapat 10% nung all operating segments. Then, the assets of the segment are 10% or more of the combined assets of all operating segments. Same din dun sa ginawa natin sa dalawa. So, meron kang segments A to D, tapos given yung asset nung bawat operating segment na yon, add mo lahat nung kanilang assets, then yung total nun, 10% nun. Okay? So, kapag merong 10% si segment A, B, C, or D, edi pasok sila doon sa reportable segment. Understand, gamitin natin yung illustration 1. So, revenue, profit or loss, and assets for each operating segment are as follows. So, we have segments A to E. Then, given ang kanilang revenues, profit or loss, and yung assets. Then, ito ang kanilang total. Requirement is to determine the reportable operating segments dito sa given na ito. So, sabi natin, kanina para maging reportable segment, kailangan 10% sila ng total revenue, total profit or loss, total asset. Okay. Ngayon, i-apply natin yung theory or concept. So, first, dito muna tayo sa revenue at saka sa assets ng segments A to E. So, what we have is 40 million total revenue and 45 million total assets. So, since 10% daw ng total revenue, para maging reportable segment ka, ibig sabihin 10% times 40 million is equal to 4 million. Titignan mo ngayon yung revenue ng bawat segment. So, si segment A ay 16 million. Pasok ba dun sa 4 million na reportable amount? Yes. So, ibig sabihin, check siya, reportable segment si segment A. Next, we have segment B, 13 million. So, syempre, pasok dun sa 4 million, reportable segment. Ganon din si segment C na 6 million. How about segment D and E? Kasi 3 million and 2 million lang sila. Ibig sabihin, hindi sila nakapasok dun sa threshold na 10% of the total amount of revenue. Ibig sabihin, they are not reportable segments. Okay, ganun lang mag-identify kung reportable segment ba or hindi. Next, proceed tayo sa assets. Sabi 10% daw ng total assets of all reportable segments or of all operating segments. So, ang threshold 10% no 45 million is 4.5 million. So, tignan natin ang assets ni segment A, 25 million. Syempre, pasok. Ganon din kay segment B. So, we have 11 million higher than or pasok siya doon sa threshold ng 4.5 million. Pagdating sa segment C, D, and E, hindi na sila pasok sa 4.5 million. So, if ang tanong sa inyo ay reportable segment according doon sa total assets, si segment A and B lang yung reportable segment. Kung ang tanong naman ay segments na included dun sa report or operating segments na included sa reportable segments, for segments na lang. So, kapag revenue ang tanong, segment A, B, and C. Okay? Then, meron pa tayong isa na titignan yung profit or loss na given sa problem. So, eto ang profit or loss na given sa problem. Okay. So, segments A to E. Meron ditong total 1.3 million. Ano bang sabi ng standard natin? Ang sabi ng standard natin, kunin daw natin yung absolute amount ng profit or loss. Kung saan doon yung 10% nung mas greater amount. Okay? So, combine natin yung total profit. So, sino bang merong profit dito? Segment A, 1.7 million. Segment B, 500,000. And segment D, 200,000. So, the total profits is 2,400,000. And yung total loss na meron tayo is 1 million plus 100,000 is 1.1 million. Since absolute amount, i-disregard na natin kung loss or profit or kung negative or positive. 10% daw ng greater amount. Ano ba yung mas malaki? Etong 2.4 million na profit. So, dyan natin i-multiply yung 10%. So, ibig sabihin, para kasama siya as reportable segment, 10% times 2.4 million is equal to 240,000. Ito dapat amount niya or greater pa dyan. So, segment A has a profit of 1.7 million. Included ba sa reportable segment? Yes, included. Segment B, 500,000 na profit. Included or not? Included siya. How about segment C? 1 million loss. Sabi natin absolute amount, so i-disregard mo na yung positive or negative or kung loss or profit. So 1 million is greater than 240,000, so reportable segment. How about segment D and E? They are 200,000 and 100,000, meaning hindi pumasok dun sa 240,000 na threshold. Okay? Or 10% ng 2.4 million. So they reportable segments. Okay, so in conclusion, ang reportable segments lang natin ay si A, B, and C. Kasi sabi naman ng PFRS 8, any of the following threshold. 'Di ba? Basta meron siya doon or check siya sa kahit ano dyan sa revenue, assets, or profit or loss, reportable segment muna siya. So, dito A, B, C, dito A, B, dito A, B, C rin. So, kahit hindi siya naging reportable segment under the assets, reportable segment pa rin siya. Kasi nga, pasok siya dito sa revenue. Pasok rin naman siya sa profit or loss. Okay? So, reportable segments A, B, and C. And yung segments D and E, yan ay i-disclose lang natin. As operating segments, syempre. Okay, so since we already know how to identify a reportable segment, so yun yung mga 10% dapat ng revenue, ng assets, or ng profit or loss. Okay? So, meron kasi tayong tinatawag na overall size test or 75% threshold. Ibig sabihin, if the total external revenue of reportable segments constitutes less than 75% of the entity external revenue, additional operating segments shall be identified as reportable segments, even if they do not meet the 10% quantitative thresholds until at least 75% of the entity external revenue is included in reportable segments. So, anong ibig sabihin? So, meron kasi tayong 75% na entity external revenue. Yun yung threshold. So, kahit daw na-identify na natin yung mga segments into reportable at hindi or non-reportable segment, pwede pa rin na mag-combine tayo ng operating segments, okay? Para makumpleto natin at least 75% ng entities external revenue. And included na siya dun sa reportable segment. Okay, so para mas maintindihan, ito yung ating example. Next slide. Ay, hindi pa pala. Char. So, aggregation of segments. So, meron tayong 5 aggregation criteria. Sabi kasi natin, di ba, yung non-reportable segments, pwedeng maging reportable segment pag pinag-combine natin sila. Pero, meron tayong dapat sundin. So, 2 or more operating segments may be aggregated into single operating segment if the segments have similar economic characteristics and the segments share a majority of the following criteria. So, majority. So, this is 5 criteria. So, kahit mga 3, okay yun. So, we have nature of product or service, nature of production process, type of class of customers, marketing or product distribution method, and the regulatory environment. So, dapat daw, para ma-aggregate natin into single operating segment yung 2 or more operating segments, dapat similar sila dito sa 5 criteria na ito. So, pwede hanggang 3, but majority dapat nitong following criteria. Illustration. An entity has no inter-segment sales and has the following operating segments with their corresponding revenue. So, we have segments 1 to 8 and given yung kanilang revenues. So, 2.4 million, 1.6 million, 1.2 million, 720,000, 640,000, 560,000, 480,000, and 400,000 for segment 8 for a total of 8 million pesos and 100% yan. So, di ba sabi natin, para maging reportable segment, 10% of the total revenue. So, given dito yung percentage ng bawat segment. So, we have 30% for segment 1. Ibig sabihin, included siya sa reportable segment. Segment 2, included din since 20% siya. And 15% yung segment 3, ibig sabihin included din siya. And the other segments, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5%, hindi sila reportable segment. Kasi nga, hindi nakapasok dun sa 10% na quantitative threshold. So, sabi ng ating PFRS, pwede naman daw na magdagdag pa tayo, okay, ng reportable segment kung hindi umabot ng 75% na threshold, which is the external revenue ng entity. Okay, so yan yung sabi natin, pasok sa reportable segment at hindi itong segments 4 to 8. So, ang pasok lang sa segments 1, 2, and 3 na merong total of 65%. Okay, 30 plus 20 and 15 is 65%. Ano ang threshold natin? 75% daw ng entity's external revenue. So, meron pa tayong natitirang 10%. At least 75%. So, okay, kahit lumampas maging 76 or whatever. Okay. Basta at least 75% ng entity's external revenue. So, anong gagawin natin? So, merong assumption kasi. So, assume daw natin na yung segment 7 and 8 have similar products, similar production process, similar marketing method, and are not operating under regulated environment. So, majority dun sa aggregate criteria ay nakuha ni segment 7 and 8. So, pwede nating i-combine yung dalawang non-reportable segments na yan into one operating segment. Then, tignan natin yung kanilang percentage. 6 and 5%. So, total niyan is 11% plus the 65% na percentage nitong tatlong segments na ito. Ilan na siya? 65 plus 11 is 76%. Pasok na ba doon sa 75% na threshold for external revenue ng entity? Yes po, pasok na siya doon sa at least 75% threshold. So, ibig sabihin, included na si segment 7 and 8 sa reportable segment dahil nakapasok sila dun sa aggregate criteria. Okay, so the reportable segments are segments 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. And yung non-reportable 4, 5, and 6 naman. Next illustration about Timmy Company. So, Timmy Company provided the following information in relation to revenue earned by operating segments for the current year. So, ang tanong dito is, what total revenue should be disclosed by the reportable segments? Sabi, di ba, is i-disclose natin yung sales kasama na yung intersegment. Okay, sales. At yung sales natin sa outside customer or external customers. So, eto yon. Total revenue yung titignan natin. So, the total revenue or yung combined total revenue is 83,000 pesos. Etong 60,000 na consolidated, ito yung makikita natin sa income statement. Tatanggalin natin yung intersegment sales or yung income dun sa intersegment sales. Okay, so we have 83,000. What is the 10% of 83,000? 8,300. So, dapat 8,300 or more para masabi nating reportable segment. So, ang included lang dyan ay yung kay BIX, segment BIX, 12,000, and segment deal na 59,000. Okay, so eto kasi yung percentages nila. 100% syempre yung 83,000, we have 9.64% dun sa 8,000, 14.46% sa 12,000, 4.82% sa 4,000, and 71.08% naman yung kay deal. So, 12,000 and 59,000 ang reportable revenue. So, what is the total revenue na dapat i-disclose ng reportable segment? 71,000. 12,000 plus 59,000 is 71,000. Ganun lang siya. So, kahit hindi nyo na nga i-percent, ito lang, multiply nyo by 10%, is 8,300. Ang nakapasok lang si segment BIX at si segment deal. Illustration number 4. Gram Company, a publicly owned entity, is subject to the requirements of segment reporting. In the income statement for the year ended December 31, 2021, the entity reported revenue of 50 million, excluding intersegment sales of 10 million, expenses of 47 million, and net income of 3 million. excluding o including. Okay. So, expenses included payroll cost of 15 million. Daming sinabi, di ba? So, the combined identifiable assets of all operating segments on December 31, 2021 totaled 40 million pesos. The questions are, first, in the financial statements, the entity should disclose major customer data if sales to any single customer amount to at least, so yun yung tanong, yung dapat daw i-disclose for major customer data. Second, external revenue of reportable operating segments must be what amount? So, external revenue, may threshold tayo dyan na 75%. Answer for number 1 question, in the financial statements, the entity should disclose major customer data if sales to any single customer amount to at least, answer is 5 million. So, multiply mo lang yung 10% dun sa total na 50 million na sales. So, anong paliwanag? This is the explanation for that. PFRS 8 provides that a major customer disclosure is required if an entity derives 10% or more of its external revenue from a single customer or group of entities under common control. So, yan yung explanation of PFRS 8. So, ang sagot natin is 5 million pesos. Kapag nakabenta tayo ng 5 million pesos sa ating major customer or single customer or group of entities, magiging reportable na siya or i-disclose na natin siya. The second question, external revenue of reportable operating segments must be what amount? Sabi natin, for the external revenue, meron tayong threshold na 75%. So, ang gagawin lang natin is to multiply the 50 million sales by 75% to get the reportable operating segments of the external revenue. So, the explanation under PFRS 8, the total external revenue attributable to reportable operating segments, ito na nga yung threshold, 75% of the total entity external revenue. So, titignan nyo yung question kung ano ba yung mga tinatanong sa inyo. Illustration is this, illustration number 5. Graph Company discloses supplemental operating segment information. The following information is available for the current year. So, we have segments X, Y, and Z. And given yung kanilang sales and traceable expenses, we have 5 million, 4 million, 3 million. So, additional expenses are indirect segment expenses of 1.8 million, general corporate expenses 1.2 million, and interest expense 600,000, income tax expense of 400,000. The interest expense and income tax expense are regularly reviewed by the chief operating decision maker as a measure of profit or loss. So, appropriate common expenses are allocated to segments based on the ratio of a segment's sales to total sales. How much is the total sales? 5 plus 4 plus 3 is 12 million. So, ganun daw, ina-allocate yung common expenses nila. So, what is segment Z's operating profit? So, hanapin natin yung operating profit ni segment C based dyan sa given na yan. Solution or answer, merong total sales si segment C na 3 million. Then, ililist lang natin yung mga expenses na traceable sa kanya or allocated sa kanya. So, the traceable expenses are 1.5 million. The indirect expenses, diba, sabi, ina-allocate based dun sa proportion niya sa total sales. So, 3 million divided by 12 million times 1.8 million na total indirect expenses. Ang allocated indirect expense for segment C is 450,000. And the interest expense, syempre, 3 over 12 times 600K na total indirect or interest expense. So, we have 150,000. And the income tax, na 400,000, 3 over 12 yung allocated sa kanya. So, 100,000 for a total expenses of 2.2 million. So, sales less expenses, we have segment profit for segment C na 800,000 pesos. So, that's the answer for illustration number 5. Presentation. Ang ganda lang nung sinabi ni Vice Ganda. Di pare-pareho ang mga araw. Minsan magaan, minsan mabigat. May mga araw na isusumpa mo, may pagkakataon na isipin mong sumuko. Pero wag kang bibigay. Pilitin mong malampasan. Ang sarap sa pakiramdam pag nakaraos ka at sasabihin mo sa sarili mo, buti na lang, di ako sumuko. O, diba? Kasi minsan kapag sumuko ka, ikaw rin ang talo. Okay lang naman magpahinga kasi, pero wag kang sumuko, lalo na kung gustong-gusto mo yung bagay na yon or kung pangarap mo talaga yung bagay na yon, wag mong sukuan kasi at the end of the day, pag nalampasan mo lahat yan, mas masarap sa pakiramdam. Mas nakaka-happy, lalo na pag nakuha mo yung goals mo. Okay? So, bahala na kayong magnilay-nilay kung ano pang gusto nyong isipin dyan. End of presentation and bye-bye guys. God bless and stay safe.